Okay, so I'll see what comes out of this. I've been giving a similar talk as I was quite nervous when I went to Yale at the statistics department to give this talk because I'm not a statistician, and this talk contains a lot of statistics, at least the version I gave there. And it turns out that many of the stuff that I was presenting there, not as of course new stuff, but anyways, as a background, I realized 15 minutes before I gave the talk that most of that stuff was kind of invented by people sitting in the audience there. So that's why I was talking about what you guys have been doing.
Sorry, I'm from Yale.
Okay. So they strike again. And in the front row, and do you have a piece of chalk in your hands?
Some of my best friends are from Yale.
Yeah, I still consider those guys as friends, nevertheless. Anyway, so I'd first like to have, as in kindergarten always, as you said, group activity. We'll play a little game, okay? So we'll see how good you are at pretending to be Darwin. All right? So I will write here 3 sentences, and then, well, I'll explain what you're supposed to be doing then. Let's see what happens. I was just thinking about this thing on the way here in the taxi. Luckily, he took a detour, so I had more time. So let's try this one. One person at least, well, 2 people understand it. And then I hope some people at least in the back row can see what I'm writing here. And then
Google Translate. Do you have any better pens? Because I will also need a pen tomorrow, and I would not like it to run out of ink after a few seconds.
We will make sure that you have enough pens. And there is more here in this here.
But maybe you should change the pen.
Yeah, I changed to the black one, I think.
all right.
It is as miserable, the black one.
It is.
Yeah.
I'll change it anyway.
Run dry after seconds.
You can Google Translate.
Yep. That looks Finnish. But I know almost no Finnish at all.
Well, we're here to learn, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, here are 3 sentences, and they're kind of mixed up. And now I can reveal to you that this came about as a result of descent with modification, Darwin's great idea. And now you are supposed to be figuring out how exactly they came about, how they are related to one another, and perhaps what was the ancestor, what was the archetype of this sentence. And in the meantime, I will go and find the restroom. Where's the restroom? I'm serious.
Yeah, that motor is fine and 40 seconds. There's 3 pots. Значи, не по 1 satellite. Also 2 and bar is also the same mutation rate. So, yeah. Well, you do simple correlation analysis. You always choose 2 out of 3 is already mature.
You're already spilling the beans.
No, there are people even smarter than me. I mean,
All of them have two Finnish words which can be put together. That's,
so there are 3 words which are repeated twice.
there is noise added, different noise each time, or substituted for. One word is replaced by either Finnish or just noise.
And then the other things are.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I think the answer to Finnish.
Even I can.
Tell me if when he does and you're start.
We already, okay.
I know that.
We cannot see it.
You can't read that.
Axel, we cannot see this.
No, that's not the first solution we came up.
No.
That's the wrong one.
There are no 3 words here
No, that's
twice.
the wrong one.
I mean, you take regulatory, pi, and for the second diagonal. There are 3 words which are repeated twice. I mean, simple correlation analysis. Maybe Axel knows some secret which we don't.
Yes, Axel knows.
Axel, but anyway, it's invisible what we did there. It's invisible. Go on.
Yeah, I like your second sentence. Well, so he's written 2 sentences, 3 words that are
Anyway,
in
the
common,
first part,
and then the 3 words that are in
You look,
common.
like in any kindergarten, at some point you need to take, command of unruly kids.
His second language or something.
They need to use this as well.
I mean, I couldn't get any further than to say that obviously we're going to show the Födelsedagen, and the other words probably were Finnish, and it seems to have been confirmed. And so
Yes.
the same 3 words in Finnish.
That's right, yes, but this is not
Confirmed by
actually
Axel.
quite
It's not the
relevant.
point, but it doesn't matter in which language.
Yeah, it doesn't matter for the argument. The point here is that we would assume that in this descent with modification, usually there's no change. So we prefer some sort of a parsimonious explanation to the data, to the observations. And if we assume that, well, even though you can't see, but this is now gratulationer på födelsedagen here, if you assume that this is the original sentence, then we only need to make one change here to create that sentence.
Each time it's one change.
Each time there's one change. So this is actually the minimum number of changes that you
That
can.
was noticed while you were away.
Yeah, I bet. I knew that. And that was the whole point, actually. So let's go on with the talk, with this maybe in the back of our minds.
That means it doesn't.
Now, what is the meaning of this?
This means due to, but we Finns put it in the end.
No, what's the meaning of the whole sentence?
It says congratulations for your birthday. So okay, this will come back to us, this same example during the talk. So it was not just for me getting to the question. So I will talk about 2 things. Some sort of a more abstract sense. I will talk about trees, spanning trees, something called signet trees, which we just actually created there, and an algorithm called structural EM, although I will not get into the details. I think I have the time. And then I will talk about maybe what Eric had in mind, why this is kind of fitting to the session here, evolution of texts, and the phylogenetic approach to analyzing old texts. And I'll present some results on the work we've been doing on this, in collaboration with historians. So, okay, let's look at the trees for a while. here we create some sort of a life form. You could imagine, although this is completely unrealistic in terms of biology, but let's imagine that this is the origin of life, the first life form on Earth. And then it develops into something else over the course of time. Here's the change, and etc.
What is that? Netanyahu?
It's a fish with a big head.
Yeah. And then it develops further, and it splits here into two different populations that after a while they cannot mate with one another again, so they become different species. And this recurs, and then we have species of today. And of course in phylogenetics, the question is, what if we don't know what was before? And especially we don't know what's the structure, what are the connecting lines between those species that we have today. So yeah, I think I will just skim over this to show you that it's really quite basic at the level of probabilistic modeling of what can be done to handle this problem. So we assume that there is a tree structure with vertices and edges, with some n+1 vertices in the graph, and these would be now individual species represented by their features, or we can represent them as a DNA sequence of a typical individual in the species. So vertices are the species. Then the probability that a node or one of the vertices takes some value x, and we will not care about what this is. It could be the set of features, or it could be the DNA sequence. Is some probability p of x, or p sub x actually. And then we have this probability that says, what if the parent species of which a given species has developed takes value y, so now this could be the DNA sequence of the parent. What is the probability that the child takes some value x? And then we come up with this probability somehow. This has to be defined, of course, and very interesting issues about how you should go about defining that. But we can just assume that it's defined or given to us. And then we make an additional assumption here, which is relevant, but maybe we'll not go into that either. It's just saying that the direction of time is not identifiable from this data alone. But let's not worry about that at the moment. And then we can write the probability of observing what we've observed, the full sequences of all the species, including the ones that are lost. So this is not something we know, but we could write it down. What is the probability of all the sequences taking certain values under a given tree by just taking the probability that the root, the original thing on the top, takes some value, and then just the probability of all the children given their parents. So you go in the tree and you check the probabilities and you multiply them together. This is now a simple probability assignment to any data sets we might observe. And of course the point is that this depends on the tree structure that we postulate. And therefore it allows us to compare different tree structures in terms of their probability, or the probability of this is kind of the likelihood of the data under the tree. So you can try out different trees, you can try different ways of combining the observed sequences and finding the one under which the observed data are as likely as possible, of maximum likelihood. And we could, I'm just wondering how much I should sort of turn this around. Maybe I'll just skip to the conclusion. And it is that under the assumption that it's that the time of the direction of time is unidentifiable, this becomes just a sum of certain terms that don't depend on the order. If you start at this, or if you start at that, or that, or that, it doesn't really matter. But what matters is that which ones of them are made pairs. Which ones are directly combined by an edge. This is now an edge here. And in that sense, it just becomes a a simple tree criterion where you just sum up certain weights of a graph. So you want to find the tree connecting the given dots or the given vertices in the graph that maximizes the total sum of edge weights. And that's of course the maximum spanning tree problem. So now we can redo, assuming that we've observed all the species, including the extinct ones, we could just do a maximum spanning tree algorithm under this probability model that I showed on the previous slide. And then you've got your phylogenetic tree explaining with as few changes as possible the whole data. So here's the problem, and I could just pick the sum of the edge weights that minimizes the cost, so that all nodes are connected to one another. And that's, as I said, the maximum spanning tree problem. And under the probabilistic assumptions that I made, it's really also the maximum likelihood solution to the phylogenetic problem. Now, what makes this kind of tricky is the same thing as in the birthday idea here. I just gave you these three sentences, but I didn't give you the one that you postulated, namely the one that makes sense. So I didn't give you one of the dots here. And that's what makes this problem difficult. Otherwise it would be trivial. Otherwise there would be no phylogenetic research. Otherwise it would have all stopped here. And that's what the kind of fun thing is. And this is related to something called the Steiner tree problem, which perhaps, so how many of you are familiar with Steiner trees?
Heard it.
So not too many, that's good, because then I will not sort of be repeating too much of what you already know. So now what's the best way to connect these three dots using straight lines? One good way is to connect this guy with that guy and that guy with that guy, but there is a better way. So any ideas? With what I just said? Yeah. So now the sum of edge lengths here is smaller. Okay, this is fine. And that's a better tree now. It has fewer changes, as it were, if we pretend that the edge length here gives you the number of changes in the graph. So this is now a better solution. Just like that, the one with the extra sentence was better for these three sentences. And this has been realized for a long time, that Steiner trees correspond to phylogenetic trees in this sense.
And what is the definition of Steiner tree?
It's the shortest tree. It's the minimum spanning tree, except you're allowed to add extra point here.
1 point.
As many as you like.
As many as I like to make just a sum shorter.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, it applies in other examples as well. For instance, like that.
2 points.
Now, that's the optimal thing. This has been known for a few decades, that for a Euclidean distance, the optimal tree is always such that the angle between two edges coming from a new point, not one of these ones that I already gave, is 120 degrees. And that also applies in higher dimensions, not only two-dimensional cases. And it also holds that all the added nodes have degree 3.
Yeah, because 120.
Yeah. And all kinds of interesting things are known about Euclidean Steiner trees. There are also, of course, other ways to define the problem. For instance, we say that it has to be on this, these are the allowed points, and you're only allowed to draw lines like that. You're not allowed to put a line like that. Mm-hmm. This is also studied to some extent, actually quite extent. And here, again, we can see that the Steiner tree is better than the maximum the minimum spanning tree, because the sum of the standard tree edges is 8, so that's 2 plus 4 plus 2, and the minimum spanning tree is 10 units. So again, it beats the minimum spanning tree. And then I think I have a final example here, which is the same as that. So these are now binary features. It's kind of biologically motivated. There are DNA letters, so A, and T, and there's one change from AAT is now the original sentence or sequence. There's one change to AAA, there's one change to TAT, there's one change to ATT, just like here. It's really identical. This is just to show that it's not only in higher dimensions or Euclidean space or stuff like that, but you can do this in various other ways. And again, these new points emerge. So this is kind of the one way to look at phylogenetic inference, and we've got this algorithm that kind of handles this problem in a nice way, and it's kind of structural EM. How many of you know about the expectation maximization algorithm, EM? Not very
Did you say the expectation?
maximization. Is probably you know it by another name, because it's a standard thing.
Probably yes.
It's this alternating minimization or maximization thing where you
That, yeah.
because it's I forgot all the names that it has in different fields, but it's such a kind of basic idea that I'm sure maybe Eric knows the other names.
Exponent machines, you can call it.
I suppose, yeah. So the thing is here, you just can't see it too well, but the white dots here, or maybe it should be are the green to you? Green dots here, they are the fixed ones that we have been given. And the yellow ones are now something we can just define as we like. We can just move them about, we can just remove or add them, whatever. Those are the new points in the standard tree. And the green lines obviously are the edges we are allowed to put as we like. And what we do is we just initialize it with a random tree, put the yellow nodes somewhere, just connect them some way. And now the terminology follows the expectation maximization literature, kind of machine learning literature. But we do in step 1 inference about where the yellow ones should be put. Like that. So we noticed that it was better to just make this one, for instance, a straight line. Of course, it doesn't matter. It makes sense to put the yellow one anywhere else, but just exactly in between, along the straight line of its neighbors, and so forth. And the 120-degree angles emerge here as well. And then we do the minimum spanning tree algorithm, where we are fixing now the positions of the nodes, okay? And we're allowed to move the edges. So now we connect different nodes. I think this one will be connected to that or that. This is a projection from 3D, so maybe it doesn't make sense, but because you would assume that it would be something, but it just looks fun. It's in 2D. And then you go back to step 1. Now we've noticed that actually this one is not along a straight line. It will probably change like that, and then we can again connect the dots and repeat and repeat. I think I put a little bit of time to show it when it moves on the demo. So here, I guess you can see, we've got again the same colors. The green ones are the ones we've been given, and the yellow ones are the ones that we've added there. And as you can see, the 120-degree angles emerge. And we can do it for a little bit bigger graphs, like that. And the reason basically why we made this was to sort of see in what type of situations it doesn't work. and in which ways does it not work? And it turns out that the problem is that it converges very quickly to connecting a pair of nodes, and thereafter it doesn't change it, even though it might have been better to do the structure a little bit different. But anyways, this is a local algorithm that converges to a local optimum and stays there. And then we can do simulated annealing. Well, physicists must know about this, yes?
Yes.
So we can add a little bit noise to the procedure and not always connect the ones that are closest, but maybe the ones that are second closest or third closest, and then gradually decrease the temperature as it goes. And that we can do as well. And hence we can basically do this phylogenetic inference using such an algorithm. So now we will apply this to evolutionary analysis of texts. I think I have first Darwin's tree. This is from Darwin's notebook B, which he prepared on the Beagle ship when he was there. I think this is more or less the only picture he drew. Otherwise, it's just plain text. But he drew this this tree, obviously, and he gives some comments on here how B and C should be closer to one another than B and A, for instance, due to their closer ancestral relationships and stuff like that. We should, I think, keep in mind, and yeah, well, this came up in Yale when they corrected me about the fact that this would be a tree, because species that actually evolve, reproduce sexually, it's not a tree, because you've got always two parents, not one. And so if you look at it close enough, it looks like this. This is the population structure, where the parents are on this level, and then the children are at that level. And so on. But if you look at it from far enough, it looks like that, because after a while, the individuals will not be able to mate with one another again, and then they will emerge as different species. But we'll just keep that in mind, I guess. So what does it mean that we have evolution of texts? Does it make sense to talk about such a thing?
And copying, or?
That's right. So here's a text, and here's a copy. At the same time, sorry about the terrible resolution, but it's in old Finnish. You wouldn't be able to read it anyways. But what is important here is that otherwise the text has been copied more or less correct. But there's one mistake here where it says veljelensän. That means to his brother. And there it says veljelensän with two L's. In Finnish we've got this double consonants pretty frequently. Actually the modern spelling is this one. It's with not W but a V. Just a V. But the modern spelling is this, and that's probably why the scribe made a mistake here. This, by the way, is from an experiment where we made our students copy texts, and we observed what kind of changes they made, and we applied our methods to trace the history of their copies from the mistakes.
How many generations of copies?
I think the maximum was perhaps something like more than 10. But it's a big tree, so that it diverges. From one text, they made several copies, and from then again they made several copies. I'll show the structures in a while, because they are kind of the ones that we were interested in, not the changes in themselves.
And they were making different mistakes. The same person making different mistakes in copying the same text several times.
Suddenly, it's a long text, so you wouldn't. And of course, they didn't do them on purpose. You actually make a lot of mistakes when you're copying. We learned that. So these are the similarities. So copying is reproduction, and now errors or copying mistakes are mutations. So that's in which that is the similarity. Then of course there are very important differences as well. Like for instance, the changes that you make in when you're copying might also be other types than mistakes. You might want to change it. You might think, oh, here's an error, I'll fix it. Or here's a piece of text I don't particularly like, I'll change it. And in the Middle Ages, that also happened when there was a text of importance. Some political reasons might have led to changes in the text of particular type. You might extend the text by your favorite additions, or you might omit something that you don't like.
If you take a Muslim and ask him to copy God is glad, he will likely copy God is great.
Yeah, so that's certainly not random in that sense. Whereas in biology, you would get away pretty much saying they're random. The changes are random. So every time there's a letter T, there's a certain probability it becomes a T, an A, or a G, or a C. Those might vary, but it doesn't depend on the intentions of the copies or enzymes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but for example, when you mentioned about favorite text, I think there's been a long-standing dispute about Shakespeare's first folios, where, for example, certain letters like S, F, a very famous example being in Macbeth, where it's not clear whether it was dusty death or dusky death. So, because of the economics of that time, where the copywriter, when he was making the press, there's this whole mutation of certain letters in certain English texts that I know.
Right, yeah. So those texts, even the early printed ones, are sort of relevant here. We're usually studying the written texts, where the monks would be the scribes in the monasteries copying stuff by hand and stuff like that. But this is also relevant to printed texts due to these reasons. So again, these changes might be very non-random. So you might have a very big change suddenly, which you would not expect just by a random chance. Another change that is actually interesting, especially for our particular research, is that in evolution you would assume that all the extinct species are gone. You don't feed them in the analysis, you just feed the ones that are living now. You kind of look at the tree, as I showed in the beginning, the funny looking fish, and those dinosaurs, they used to be, but we don't know anything about them. This movie, Jurassic Park, it's just a movie. You don't go in the mosquitoes and extract DNA from dinosaurs. That doesn't happen. So you don't get any information about the internal nose of the tree. You just get the leaves at the bottom, and then you're supposed to build the tree. But in texts, we might, in principle, if we're very, very lucky, we might find the original one. Because it doesn't disappear as generations of animals disappear when they die. So that's interesting, especially to what we've been doing recently. And another thing is important is that in evolution you can basically assume that always the population of one species is.
Among these experiments you did with students, did you try, for example, having the students not understanding a word of what they were copying, to see if eventually pure noise emerged or not?
No,
rather than another meaningful thing.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What would happen if they wouldn't, or if it at some point would sort of somehow? At one point, actually, it happened that they made a copy of the original, which we kept safe because we didn't want anything to happen to it. But the copying machine was so bad that it was really almost impossible to read it. And then when this person created a copy from this unreadable text, it was really crazy. It was really completely.
No, but humans are unable to produce pure noise. It will be still not a pure noise as long as humans do it.
That's true. There was not pure noise, obviously, but it was completely rubbish.
Rubbish we produce lots.
It was actually Shakespeare, since you mentioned. We had Julius Caesar, Act 1, Scene 1, copied by the students. And then one of them was sort of destroyed by this copying machine. And it was really amusing to read this text. It was completely rubbish. And she invented she was a Chinese person, on top of everything else. And she was inventing fun stuff.
You can then recognize that it is English, although it looks garbage, and then you try to make it into more meaningful English. But if you don't recognize any pattern that you're familiar with, then it's completely different.
Yeah. So this is, it's really tricky to
You can do
find.
lobotomy on your students.
Yeah, I suppose. So, but in this business, you end up with thinking of very complex things about how people change things and stuff like that. And then it's an interesting debate about whether this is useful or whether you should just look at the parts of the text that you can assume to be more or less random, like punctuation and stuff like that. It doesn't follow any patterns. But anyways, so there are differences, and that's we should keep that in mind. Multiplication means that from a given text you can make as many copies as you like, but you can assume that in biological evolution the population always splits in half. Then the next day it could again split in half and half and half, but always in two. So you draw these trees so that they are always bifurcating. So I mean, like, did I do something? And never something like that. And these phylogenetic algorithms are always doing that stuff. Whereas for texts, you might sometimes want to do this. Okay. And there are other applications besides just like copying, direct copying. Well, this maybe goes to that category still. Like there's been this work a while ago. It was in 2003 about tracing the history of chain letters that people used to copy by. It was sort of before the chain letters started to be spread by email only, but this was really when there were letters mailed on the post and copied with a copying machine. And then at some point, the copy of a copy of a copy of a copy was not readable anymore, so that the person had to type it again. But since it was not readable, they made mistakes or changes, and maybe they wanted to change some stuff. And then these guys did analysis on the history of those chain letters, how they, at which point was a particular feature introduced or part of the story was introduced. This is about African rhythmic patterns in different tribes. So as an example, I don't know anything about it, but just took this example. And people have studied the relationships between these things, assuming that they've been spread following this descent with modification idea. That there was an original rhythm somewhere, and that spread in two different tribes. They made some changes. Again, from them it spread, and changes were made. Flamenco styles have been analyzed. Here's an example of a non-tree-like structure. But
also on rhythmical pattern or on what? What we are analyzing flamenco? It's multidimensional.
Yeah, sure. But you can have a number of features that you just put in the algorithm, and this seems to be made with something called splits tree algorithm. But I don't know what data how they represented certain types of flamenco. But that has been done and studied. Of course, languages. Interesting field. Finnish is not related to anything you probably know, except if someone knows Hungarian. But even if they know, they wouldn't understand Finnish. Estonian, yes.
Samoyed.
I suppose, yeah.
Yes,
Basque.
Samoyed languages.
Yeah. Right.
Nope.
No.
Basque is an outlier. It seems to be.
Basque is completely isolated.
On Ural, Ural region in Russia, there are probably some relatives too.
Second?
And Ural region in Russia.
That's right. Yeah, this is
That's where
Finno-Ugric language group.
Komi,
Ugri, Komi. Yeah, right, yeah.
Kanti.
Okay. So Finnish is related to everything. Yeah. And you can do the same. Here's this is from Cavalli's work, so there are classic works on this, and they've done analysis on the people or the peoples based on the genetic setup or mixture, and then the languages, and then you can compare how these relate if they do match or not, and you can do the same stuff there. People have been doing it for different designs for musical instruments. And I think what's quite interesting, this is a person in the UK who's been studying Middle Eastern carpet weaving motifs and how they were spread around between different tribes. And the question, of course, here is that does it really spread following a tree, or is it more like a diffusion type process where you would, the neighboring areas would sort of, where it's not a tree, so where the influence could come back and forth and from multiple directions. And that's an actual question.
So your trees have no loops.
Yeah, exactly. So the tree is always singly connected. Okay, so what? Well, I'll just come back to the same thing here. Here's the same idea. Here's the same example. Here's this. This is Finnish, of course. Now, by this time, you know Finnish. So it says the cat is walking to the heaven. This is a children's song or something. And then it says cat is digging into a television, and the dog is digging into heaven. And then you can again do the same trick as you did here, and you can sort of realize that you can get away with only three changes if you assume that there was an extra sentence. But now, by this time, I've shown this example 3 times before. And this is a real example from this Latin legend, saint legend of Saint Henry of Finland. And it says here, Saint Henry from England, and there it says more or less the same thing. Here it says Saint Henry in England. Some of the changes are just like capitalization of H versus lowercase h here, or in, or x, from, and things like that. And we've been studying this text. Obviously it's much longer text. This is just an excerpt from that text. But this is really real data for a change, not only students copying text. I'll just mention that since I do research in information theory, we've been measuring the amount of change, not only by counting how many words changed, as we did here, but also measuring how different the words became. So a small change of, say, changing the capitalization is smaller than changing the whole word into something else. And we can do this by compression algorithms, which is pretty neat. It's very, very simple, out of the box. Just take your favorite compression algorithm and you can run that. But I will not explain too much. And that's the text. That's one manuscript of the legend of Saint Henry. And here's some data from it. That's the change I showed. There's another one. This actually we don't consider a change at all. It's the ampersand, the et sign, and the words et. We just say that this is the same thing because it's just a convention. So one could flip this back and forth. It doesn't tell us anything about the copying relationships. Here's Uppsalensen. The Swedish people know Uppsala. It's also mentioned here. Okay. Oh.
That's Uppsala with the Finnish ending.
Uppsalensen means both Uppsala or something like that.
No, it's the accusative. Uppsalensen, you know, it's the one from Uppsala in the accusative.
Okay. I don't know Latin. So here, the story is that there's this bishop, Henry, who came from England, and he came to Finland to Christianize Finland in about 1150 or so. And then there was this Finnish peasant who thought that Lalli had drank his beer. And then obviously the logical action is to kill this person. At least for us things. And so that's what he did. And then the kind of official version was that this Henry became a saint, and lots of miracles happened and stuff like that. And the unofficial version was that Lalli became the national hero, which he to some extent still is. But that was the story we were studying. We had 53 manuscripts, but this keeps going up because the historians, they keep digging up these archives, and they every once in a while, I think it's 57 by this time.
If you don't add, people don't. create new versions?
No, no, not new versions,
Stop
but
somewhere.
people find old
10th
versions.
century.
Yeah. And what we started as our objectives being locate the origin in the sense of where was it written, because there's this kind of competition between Sweden and Finland. We always want to see who's the best, and it's an interesting question: was this really written in a place which is nowadays Finland? It was Sweden. All of that area was Sweden by that time. When it was originally written, was it in a place that is now Finnish, Finland, or Swedish? And we wanted to figure this out, and we also wanted to reconstruct the original history.
It's always the same language. It wasn't translated.
It's always Latin. So here's the tree now. We did this tree, and as I said, the direction of time is not identifiable by the assumptions we make. So it's an undirected tree. You could just pick this one up here, this node, and then wiggle it like that, and everything flows down in time. Or you could have picked that node, and then again you wiggle it, and it points down. But the computer doesn't tell us that. The historians have to figure that out themselves. And they have some hints about how the words were likely to change and stuff like that. But apparently it's somewhere here, the original. And many of these texts are Finnish, so that the historians were kind of brave enough to infer that it was written in Finland. But these were Finnish historians, I don't know. And the reconstruction that the computer generated seems reasonable. It was a text of high quality, so that there were not many spelling mistakes. The monks actually didn't know that much Latin, so they tended to make the text worse and worse the more generations he generated. So the reconstruction seemed to be good, so that gives credit to the method as well. And the question is, where's the root? The computer doesn't say anything about that. Yes. And here are some results from the artificial examples or the experiments. So here's the correct structure was copied 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in this case. Here's the reconstruction. I will not sort of explain too much about the fine details about the method, but this is our last year method that actually puts some of the observed nodes in the internal positions. And this is not what the phylogenetic methods would do. So it identified N1 as the immediate ancestor of N13, and then stuff like that. In principle, it doesn't quite work that way, but in principle it could tell you that we run the algorithm, and then when we tell the historians, well, actually you need to look for 1, 2, 3, and so many more. They are somewhere if you just keep looking, or maybe at least they used to be. So we can tell them how many more they need to look for, or at which point they can stop. Now you found them all. Or if they can't find them, we can say, well, we can tell you whatever agrees in them anyway, so we don't need to look too much. And here's another example. And here's a bigger one. Actually, I think 67 copies were made in total. And this is that's the Shakespeare experiment where we made 95 different copies. So it's a big pile of paper to have them all. And so maybe you can see it, but here there are cases where it's not a tree, so we call this contamination. Sometimes the scribes, they took 2 pieces of text and they created some sort of a combination of them. And this is a real problem, the hot topic, as it were, in this field, which is called, by the way, called stematoology. So we created in this artificial manuscript quite heavy contamination just to see if anyone could solve that in the near future. And this is what the computer did, just to show that this is the right one again. So there's this red group, there's a kind of blue, green, and orange, and of course you would expect that a good method puts these groups.
Let me ask you a question about artificial stupidity. There's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence.
Yes.
But can you make a computer emulate human stupidity in making these mistakes?
That would be very useful, because then we could, if we have a model on what kind of mistakes people make, then we can make a computer do it again, which is not very useful, but we can make the model, the methods work better. So that's a good question, and it would be useful to have that.
I mean, normally it's the computer that just manifests the stupidity of the humans.
Because stupidity is the most complicated part of human personality.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't think that anybody is able yet to measure it. It's like entropy, I mean, it's heat, it's what is hidden, because the rationality is easy to model.
Okay, but that's basically it. So there are some open problems. We want to make it better, so improving models of copying, so including artificial stupidity in a way. That's a goal. And then there's this question about, is it really a tree? You can look at the distances and sort of try to infer that, or you can try to sort of, in other words, you can try to figure out when there was this contamination event happening. That's really tricky. And then the orientation of the edges, sort of trying to figure out which way the time went in the graph. But that's that. I acknowledge some people at the history department and computer scientists.